Hey, welcome back to the channel. In my last video, I talked about why Mahou Sensei Negima is so amazing, so feel free to check that out if you haven't already. But one of the things I didn't really get to cover in that video is the magic system. Every battle shonen anime has their own power system, like chakra or nen. This is what makes the action interesting. It's more than just two guys hitting each other for 22 minutes. Fighters have to work around weaknesses and apply whatever skills they have in the most effective way possible. Nejima's magic is far from the most complex system out there, but I still think it's pretty cool. Although, unlike in Naruto, where Kakashi gives a detailed explanation about chakra nature and shape transformation, or Hunter x Hunter, where we spend several arcs establishing all the basic and advanced principles of Nen, in Nejima, we only get about one panel explaining how magic works. Seriously, one. Luckily for us, there are more than enough examples throughout the series to form at least a general understanding of its capabilities and limitations. But yeah, there might be a lot of assumptions in this video. This is in no way a complete list of every spell in the series. If I even attempted that, we'd be here all day. Think of this as just a general overview of magic as a whole. And to talk about magic, we have to understand mana. Neji explains that magic is the energy of creation, like air and water. This is a pretty vague explanation, but it's shown throughout the series that it's the energy of nature or the environment. This energy is called mana, or just magical power. Mages take this energy into their bodies by inhaling it and concentrate it onto the tip of their wands, and that's how they cast their spells. I should mention that while they might say that the source of mana is life, what they really mean is plant life, because humans don't produce mana. The energy that humans produce with their bodies is called ki, and while there is some overlap, ki is typically used for martial arts techniques, and mana is generally used for magic spells. Because it comes from nature, magic is dependent on the amount of mana in the area. So if you were transported to a completely barren wasteland, like Mars or something, then you wouldn't be able to use magic. There's even a location in the magic world called Cerberus Canyon, where magic is completely unusable. This area is likely completely devoid of mana. This creates a slight plot hole when Evangeline says that people are born with magic inside their bodies, which they can increase through training. This doesn't really make any sense, because like I just said, magic comes from the environment, and ki comes from the physical body. And Evangeline definitely knows what she's talking about. She's one of the most skilled mages in the entire series. The most likely explanation is that magic is not actually stored in the body, but it is taken in when a mage prepares a spell, and then used up when the spell is cast. She also says that to control magic, you need mental energy. So when she says that Neji and Konoka have lots of magic power, what she really means is that they have lots of mental energy, and thus can control lots of magic. Because we know for a fact that magic is dependent on environmental factors. Like in the school festival, when the World Tree filled the school with magic energy, making it much easier to use magic on campus. I guess it is possible that magic comes from nature and the mage's body, but if that were true, they should still be able to use magic inside Cerberus Canyon. But even Nagi, who was considered the most powerful mage ever, was completely helpless in the canyon, and the second he jumped out of it, he was able to use magic no problem. However you want to interpret it, all she's saying here is that some people are born with more magic capacity than others. Which brings me to my next point. While heritage does play a part in magic ability, magic is not restricted to any particular group of people. Anyone, regardless of race, can pick up a spellbook and start studying magic. Even magic beasts can use magic. The only known exceptions to this are Takemichi, who was somehow born without the ability to cast spells. He can still use magic, as he channels magic energy into his fists. He just can't chant incantations, for whatever reason. It's never explained why this is, as almost nothing about Takemichi's past is known. It's possible he was born with some kind of physical disability that prevents mana from leaving his body properly. But this is definitely the exception, not the rule. The only other exception is Tota Konoe, the main character of Yukio Holder, who was wrapped up in a set of ridiculously complex circumstances that I won't get into here. But he's basically a 1 in a million anomaly. Other than them, magic is accessible to anyone. There are no muggles. Your magic ability is based on how much you study and how well you understand it. While everyone can use magic if they study, or in Yukio Holder if you have a magic app, the amount of magic you have access to depends at least partially on your genetics. Neji's dad was one of the most powerful mages to ever live, and as a result, Neji has a ton of magic. And apparently the genetics stack, because Konoko's dad Aisha is the chief of the Kansai Magic Association, while her grandfather is the chief of the Kanto Magic Association. And despite having no training whatsoever, she has even more raw magic power than Neji does. Magic is incredibly diverse. Mages can fly, enter people's dreams, communicate telepathically, summon giant monsters, turn people to stone, and a ton of other stuff. Again, we're not going over every single spell. And I should also mention that what we'll be going over today is Western magic, the kind used by Neji, Evangeline, and almost everyone else in the series. Eastern magic is a completely different thing, and that is a story for another day. Western magic is rooted in classical mythology, so most of the spells are chanted in Latin. An average spell is 3 lines, with the last line being the name of the spell, and usually a reference to some Greek god or other mythological figure. For example, one of Neji's signature spells is as follows: Venient spiritus auralis fulgaris, cum fulgeraton flet tempistus austrina, Jovis tempistus fulgaris, which translates to, come spirits of wind and lightning, let the southern storm blow forth with lightning. Thunder tempest of Jupiter. Jupiter is the Roman god of the sky, their counterpart to Zeus, and fittingly, this spell creates a huge beam of wind and lightning. Speaking of incantations, as you might expect, they play a pretty big role in magic. In addition to the incantation itself, mages also have what's called an aria, or activation keyword, a short phrase that they recite before the incantation. Camo explains that this opens up their magic pathways. Basically, it's the on switch for their magic. The phrase itself is completely unique to the individual, and requires a ceremony to set it. Neji has Rastel Moskier Magister, Evangeline's is Liklac Lalac Lilac, and Colette has Annette Teenat Garnet. As you can see from these examples, most keys seem to follow a very similar pattern. I have no idea why this is, but following a particular rhyme scheme is not required. According to Camo, the only requirement is that it be a phrase of power that feel natural to the user. Nagi's aria, Man Man Taro Taro, breaks this trend completely. Before they create their aria, mages in training all use Practique Beginner as a temporary keyword. There are also a few one-word incantations they can use to practice with. Ardiscat casts fire, Lux for light, and Vente for a gust of wind. But like I said, most spells are 3 lines long, and if the mage is interrupted while they are chanting, then they cannot cast the spell. As you might imagine, this leaves them really vulnerable in a fight. There are a few ways around this limitation. The mage can cast the spell in advance and delay it until he needs to use it, although in the Kyoto arc, Neji states that he can only delay it by about 20 seconds or so. And I don't know if it's possible to delay multiple spells at the same time. It is possible to cast a spell without the incantation at all, but doing so seems to take quite a bit of skill, and non-incanted spells are implied to be slightly weaker than the encountered versions. We also never see anyone use really high-level magic without incantations, so I have to assume it's not possible. Despite that though, unencanted spells are practically a requirement for advanced magical combat. But a much easier way to overcome this weakness is with the Pactio system, which we'll get into in a little bit. As for how magic is cast, mages will always carry a catalyst to help them perform magic, like a wand or a ring. These items are not actually required to use magic. Both Neji and Konoko have done it without them. But doing this is implied to be really difficult, and generally taking away a mage's casting focus will leave them defenseless. There seems to be a wide range of catalysts as well. Most mages just use regular wands. Neji used the staff, which also allows him to fly. And later Evangeline gives him a ring so he can fight with both hands unoccupied. Like with lots of other series, spells in Negima are associated with various elements, like fire, water, earth, etc. Not all spells fall into this category. I think we can assume that things like illusionary and gravity magic are non-elemental, but the majority of destructive spells align with one of the classical Greek elements. The elements we've seen so far are wind and lightning, water and ice, earth and fire. Mages will tend to have an affinity for one of these elements and be able to use them more easily. Now I don't know if lightning is considered its own element, or if it's just a subset of wind, kind of like metal bending in Avatar. Neji mentions them together when he's talking about light magic, but it's unclear if they make up one element together or they just belong to the same category. Even if they don't, they're at least related. Neji has an affinity for both, and they seem to complement each other really well. All the wind spells seem to be based on defending, restraining your opponent, increasing mobility, or some other form of utility. There are no purely offensive wind spells, whereas lightning is all about offense. Lightning can be used to paralyze the opponent and incapacitate them that way, but more often than not, a lightning spell is going to blow something up. Water and ice are in the same boat. They could be one element or two. Evangeline is one of the best mages in the series, and she is called an ice mage, but never a water mage, which you would think is something they would definitely mention if ice was just a part of water. On the other hand, there's a character literally called the Avarankus of Water, whose whole thing is supposed to be water magic, and in her very limited page time, one of the only spells she ever uses is an ice spell. So I don't know. Maybe they are the same thing. Your guess is as good as mine. Ice spells in general aim to do one of two things: either pierce or crush the opponent with constructs made of ice, or to freeze them in place and capture them in ice. There are very few examples of pure water spells in the series, but they seem to do the same thing: either crush someone with water pressure or encase them in water, and also drown them. Fire magic is probably the simplest of the elements. It's about burning stuff. That's really it. Pretty straightforward. Earth magic is a lot more interesting in comparison. There's the stuff you'd expect, like stone spikes, projectiles, and giant stone pillars that can crush buildings, but it can also manipulate metal, sand, and lava. Basically, all the earthbending styles combined. It even includes petrification. Despite the fact that the different elements all have different effects, almost all standard spells are available in each element. For example, every mage can cast magic arrows, but a fire mage will shoot arrows of fire, and an ice mage will shoot arrows of ice. Speaking of which, it's about time we finally get into basic spells. The most basic combat spells one can learn are Exarmatio, or Disarmament, and Sagitta Magica, or Magic Arrows. Exarmatio/Disarmament is exactly what it sounds like: a technique to destroy or remove the opponent's weapon, and is probably the most used spell in the series. The ice variation of the spell, Frigiran's Exarmatio, causes everything attached to a person's body to freeze and shatter, without harming their physical body. Calicifian's Exarmatio burns or melts away the weapons, but by far the most common variation of the spell is Flan's Exarmatio, which creates a gust of wind that shreds anything on the person's body, including their clothes, which usually results in people being stripped naked. Because of his inexperience, Neji had a habit of accidentally casting the spell whenever he sneezed, which he never really grew out of, come to think of it. I mean, it is still a harem. In all seriousness though, this is actually a very useful way to end a fight when you don't want to hurt someone. Because, most people wouldn't be too thrilled about fighting in their birthday suit. And in Neji's defense, he's not the only one to use it this way. Ariadne's 100-kilometer broom rally was essentially a massive stripping contest. The first actually offensive spell mages typically learn is Sagitta Magica, and it's also the only one taught at the Meridiana Academy of Magic, where Neji studied. At first glance, Sagitta Magica just seems like your standard anime energy blast, which they are, but there's a bit more to it than that. First of all, just like with Exarmatio, there are different types of arrows with different effects. So far, we've seen arrows of light, wind, lightning, ice, darkness, fire, sand, and water. They seem to be relatively easy to cast unincanted. They can also be controlled mid-flight or fired out of the user's fist. It's a very simple but incredibly versatile spell. In battle, mages also protect themselves with magic barriers. These barriers surround the mage constantly and are usually invisible, but in an extreme situation, the mage can strengthen the barriers, at which point they become visible. While they can be very sturdy and have definitely saved Neji's life multiple times, they are designed for long-range protection rather than hand-to-hand combat. That's not to say that they are completely useless in a fistfight. It would still absorb some of the impact and reduce the damage, but generally, magic barriers are at least effective at short range. That being said, the strength and durability of the barrier depends on the power of the mage. Fate was able to tank a magic punch from Neji at point-blank range. His barrier stopped it completely. He was just that much stronger than Neji. It's also possible to make a barrier with multiple layers to increase their strength. All the Avarunkai had multi-layered high-density magic barriers that made them nearly indestructible. They can also be manipulated to a certain extent. Yue is not a particularly powerful mage, but because she was clever and creative enough, she was able to angle her barriers so that even though she was weaker than her opponent, she could part the attack around her, so she didn't have to block it directly. I said earlier that mages can cover their vulnerability while chanting with something called the Pactio system. A Pactio allows a mage to perform a contract with another person. The mage supplies the contractor with magic power, which greatly increases their physical strength, and in return, the contractor protects the mage while he or she casts their spells. To form a contract, the two potential partners only need to stand inside a Pactio circle and kiss. The kiss should be mouth to mouth. A kiss on the forehead or cheek will work, but it won't be nearly as effective. Camel says there are other ways to form a Pactio, but he doesn't go into any detail. Once the Pactio is formed, a card with the individual's picture will appear. The mage will be able to use this card to activate the contract and give the partner access to their full abilities. The minister is also able to use the card to activate their power, even when the master is not present. Which brings me to the Pactio artifacts. When they partner with the mage, the person in question will receive a unique magical artifact. It can be anything from a sword to a spellbook, but whatever it is, it always reflects the person's personality in some way. To summon their artifact, the user just needs to hold up their Pactio card and say a deet, or a beat to retract it. The Pactio cards also allow telepathic communication between partners, and the mage can even summon their partner to their location, though these functions are limited to a range of 5 to 10 kilometers. While the Pactio system is a great way to cover the weaknesses of wizard-style characters, for those who don't have partners or prefer to fight alone, there is also what Evangeline refers to as the magic swordsman style, where a mage fights in close range with a combination of quick spells and martial arts. To do this, they rely on supplementary magic, which are just spells that amplify your physical strength, speed, and durability. Basically, a Pactio cast on yourself. Neji uses Cantus Bellax, or Battle Song. There's also a more advanced version called Melodia Bellax, but it's essentially the same thing. This type of magic is also pretty easy to chant silently, as most characters don't actually chant before they start fighting. So whenever you see a mage punch someone through a wall without chanting a spell, they're using supplementary magic. And that's the basics of magic. There's a ton of stuff I didn't cover in this video, like Phantasmagoria, Dioramaspheres, and especially Magia Arabia, but I think you've got the gist of it by now. Like I said, this was just an overview. I'll go over individual spells in separate videos, but if there's anything specific you want me to talk about, or something in this video you want me to go into in more detail, feel free to let me know in the comments, and I'll be sure to include it in a future video. As you could probably tell by all of the 2 videos on this channel, I'm still pretty new at this, so all of your support is very, very much appreciated. More content is coming soon, I promise. So subscribe if you don't want to miss any of that. And if you want to leave a like while you're down there, then hey, I won't stop you. That's all from me. So I'll see you all next time.